Thank you so much, and it's great to be back here at the Maryborough Library. I think this is the very first event we have held since COVID, so in over a year this is the very first event, and it'll be the first of many. So we got some great events coming up, including Butch Titmarsh talking about koalas at Tandora. But today I'm going to talk about a topic that I've been researching for many, many years, and that is a man called Cecil Lowther. Many people, when I tell them I'm researching Cecil Lowther, they tell me, oh, he taught me. I was one of his students. That's actually Cecil Lowther's son, Cecil Lowther. So Cecil Lowther Jr. was a teacher at Albert and a couple other schools. But his father, Cecil Lowther, was a Maryborough resident for a very, very long time, and he wrote poetry and published it in the Chronicle for about half a century. From roughly 1911 to 1951, his poetry reflected the people, places, politics, and events of Maryborough. So I've been researching his poetry and transcribing it for many, many years. I've sort of lost track of how long I was working on it, but I know it must have been a very, very long time because I kept missing deadlines. And then I really wanted to finish it in time. My wife and I went to Italy in April 2019 for my birthday, and I thought I can easily finish it. It can be at printers and we'll get it when we get back. And then I really only just finished it last month. So it's taken years longer than I thought it would because I kept finding new poems. I thought I was pretty much finished. And then the Maryborough Historical Society gave me all their collection, which included his journals and unpublished work. And so there was always more and more to add. But I think I've got every single one of his poems transcribed in this book, this 2-volume book that I've just finished writing.
I actually went to school with his niece.
With his niece, okay. Gillian, oh yeah, Gillian. I know Gillian's son, Stephen Page.
Yes,
yeah.
And the Lowthers lived in Kent Street next to the sugar mill.
Okay, yeah, they moved on. Yeah. Yeah, they would have been, yeah. That's a interesting family. So we know Cecil Lowther mainly through the Maryborough Chronicle. He published his works in the Maryborough Chronicle for about half a century. And occasionally published in a couple other papers, like the Maryborough Alert. That was the Labour paper. So he occasionally published in the Alert, but most of his work is in the Maryborough Chronicle. We know. Oh my God! I went too many. In the same way that he wrote for many, he's known for his longevity, his consistency in terms of writing. He also worked at the same factory, Walker's, for over 60 years, which is a remarkable thing when you think about it. This is the pattern, but we don't have very good photos. Unfortunately, they didn't take many photographs of the workers. We got millions of photos of all the ships, the locomotives, everything they built. But the really photographs that tell much better of a story, like this one at the pattern making shop, we have very few and they're not very good quality. But this is the pattern making shop. He ended up being the manager of the pattern making shop, as well as the assistant works manager when he retired in June 1946. But he commenced at Walker's as a teenager in about 1883. He got a job at Walker's as a laborer soon after arriving. And he had no formal education really. He arrived as a migrant from Northern Ireland. Are we able to turn some of the lights off? So?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think we asked
yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
A lot of people in those days never ever finished school.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it would be very unusual to go past 13 or 14.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he was the youngest of 11 children, born to Walter and Eliza Lowther, and he was born in 1870 in Strabane. So you can see Strabane there, right at the north of Northern Ireland. And he left there, and he never went back after leaving in 1882 as a 12-year-old. But 60 years later, he was still writing about the River Mourne, the scenery in Northern Ireland. So he still kept an Irish heart, always referring to it in his childhood there and what Ireland meant to him. You see, so it was a town, Strabane. Long after he left, a century after he left, in the 70s and 80s, Strabane became extremely economically depressed, and it still is economically depressed because of its location. You'll see it's right on the border there. So when they had the troubles with the IRA and the UK police, and effectively something like a civil war, Strabane was right on the border, so it suffered immensely from all the conflict regarding Irish republicanism and the United Kingdom. But like many people in Maryborough for the time, he arrived by ship. The Lowthers migrated to Australia in 1882 aboard the Roma. We don't have a photo of the Roma, but this is the Eastminster, and it is docked there effectively where the wharves are now, the only wharves we have left. Once there were wharves that went for kilometres, but that's where the Maryborough Marina is, and the Deck and Anchor restaurant, known as Muddy Waters for many, many years. And none of those buildings actually exist anymore. That's not the Criterion Hotel. The Grand Hotel, yeah, which was really, really grand. Extremely flood prone though. It's very close to the river level. So that Grand Hotel was a very lovely building right at the very bottom of Wharf Street. It's sort of a big pile of rubble now. There's not a lot there. There's the back of a bit of an industrial site. He published under a pen name, so very rarely. Occasionally his poems would appear under Cecil Lowther, and they were normally political ones where I guess he felt it was appropriate to be using his name. But and back then, actually, a lot of letters to the editor were also pen names. But he published under the nom de plume of Bannerman, which was a tribute to a very early cricketer. Cecil Lowther loved cricket, and he saw cricket as a metaphor for life, about being a good gentleman, a good sport, always putting in, and nothing more honourable than having a good innings and playing fair. And his hero was a man called Alec Bannerman, who represented Australia in 28 tests between 1879 and 1893, and he was known for his extremely defensive style of play. He wasn't particularly popular with the fans because he was boring. So he was very patient and known as the stonewalling batsman. So Lowther was given that name because he also had a very defensive style, a very similar playing style. It was stagnant and sometimes almost strokeless style of play. But he was very important for the team in terms of getting through the innings. A.G. Myers, in his book Australian Batsman, gives a really good description of Bannerman when he said, "At times the crowd found him as wearisome to the flesh as fleas in a warm bed." So he was not there for applause, but there, out on the field, out on the cricket oval, to use a phrase Lowther often employed, to play the game. And so just as his inspiration on the cricket field wasn't there to entertain the crowds, Lowther took a deeper view of the surroundings and held on to a solid sense of purpose and self. I'll read a few of his poems now. His poems, they mention thousands of men and women of Maryborough that are not otherwise mentioned in the paper. Often on Melbourne Cup, he would mention every single horse, 20 horses, and which people and walkers were backing whom. He would mention events that would be totally lost to history if they were not recorded by Bannerman. So this first poem, this is published on the 22nd of July, 1918. And it's 1918. Sorry, there's so many poems, it's a bit hard to get the one. Sorry, the 20th of July, 1915. It's called A True Story of a Well. If you'll listen, I'll tell you a story of a man who sunk a well, but his name or occupation it would never do to tell. When his daily task was ended and the final whistle blew, he would hurry quickly homeward to his spouse so kind and true. When he'd reached his pleasant cottage, he would find the table spread by his wife with homely dainties and the best of homemade bread. When he'd washed his honest features, he would snatch a hasty tea. Then he'd tackle pick and shovel, for at work he longed to be. For a well he was engaged on, he was down some 20 feet, and he meant to make it shipshape, with the sides so true and neat. So he clambered down the ladder to the bottom of the shaft, and with his bucket, spade, and spud bar, he was soon engaged at graft. It was drawing nigh to bedtime when the missus came along, And she shouted down to hubby, "Do you reckon you'll be long?" And looking up he answered, "I'll be finished shortly, dear. Would you kindly lift the ladder till I get the bottom clear?" So the missus took the ladder and she laid it on the ground, and retiring to her bedroom, she was soon in slumber sound. Still hubby kept on working till he thought he'd give it best, and he reckoned it was bedtime. He was anxious for a rest. So he hollered on the missus, "Bring the ladder, wifey dear." But no answer to his yelling, save the echo did he hear. Still he yelled and bawled and shouted, till his voice was growing hoarse. Then the rain it started falling, which was making matters worse. But 'twas all in vain he shouted, for the world had gone to bed, and I would not dare to whisper all the dreadful things he said. For he felt both tired and languid, and his back began to ache, and his legs and arms were weary, and they felt as though they'd break. Oh, the hours that passed so slowly. Would the morning never come? How he longed for that old stretcher in the rubbish room at home. He was very sad and weary as he heard the clock strike 3, when he heard a voice above him saying, "Hubby, dear, it's me." 'Twas his helpmate, woke from slumber. She was filled with much alarm when she missed her lord and master, and she feared he'd come to harm. So she ran down from the bedroom, and she quickly crossed the yard, and she gently called her husband, but he answered cold and hard. And he felt so wild and savage that he freely spoke his mind, till at last his heart relented, for at bottom he was kind. When they made it up, he asked her, as a favor not to tell, how she left him till the morning at the bottom of the well. So he's recording these incidents that happened in Maryborough that nobody would remember now. The incidents told in the tea room or the shop floor at Walker's. And one thing about Lowther is he's very old-fashioned. That doesn't refer to either of them because he keeps the man anonymous, but he refers to the wife as helpmate. That's pretty common. He very rarely refers to the woman. I'm not sure if that's chivalry or just sexism, but he is very old-fashioned in that way. It refers to often the wife as a trusty helpmate. One thing about his poems is they're all positive. They're not negative. Out of 900 poems, there's perhaps 3 or 4 that are sort of negative, and they're about the council, which is, of course, going to happen. But every other one of his poems, it's about being sort of a pepping people up, because he wrote during World War I, the Great Depression, World War II. So all of his poems are about trying to lift people up. And what you see here, actually, from the Chronicle, isn't one of his poems, but it's actually from the 22nd of December 1946, and the Chronicle have gone down Adelaide Street and asked people about their New Year's resolutions. And Lowther is saying, Mr. Cecil Lowther, 41 Cheapside Street, and that house is still there, looking across to Anzac Park, said in the new year he hoped that there would be more opportunities for him to do many of the things he tried to do in the past year. I trust that I shall be able to do more than ever in making life a little brighter for others. After all, life is very short, and what better way of spending one's own life could there be than trying to do some little good for others? And that's really the motto of his life. That's really how he lived, always trying to help others. This next poem actually gives a really good summary of his philosophy, and it's called Say a Kind Word. As you travel through life, you'll find you're beset by troubles and trials galore. Let your mind travel back to the pleasures you've met. Don't think of the trials in store. But still you will find, midst the sorrow and care that's part or the portion of man, that it's better by far, whilst doing your share, to say a kind word when you can. If you work in a foundry, sawmill or shop, the railway, the mine or the mill, you'll find that the men who emerge at the top are workmen who work with a will. What's more, you will find that there's something in pluck, and many a stream it does span. So don't bump a man who is down on his luck, but say a kind word when you can. While some folks we know have much more than their share of trouble or sorrow untold, but yet through it all, though they're burdened with care, their hearts are as honest as gold. How often we've reckoned on what we would do and raised up some excellent plan, but only to find that our scheme's fallen through, so say a kind word when you can. Perhaps some poor brother has strayed from the path through weakness or effort of will, but speak to him gently, not words full of wrath, you'll find there's some good in him still. To err is quite human, we've often been told, in woman as well as in man. So never speak harshly to young or to old, but say a kind word when you can. And again, a lot of his work focused on the war efforts, particularly in World War I, when he was publishing a lot of poetry in the Maryborough Chronicle. And he's very, very patriotic to Australia and the Empire, extremely patriotic. This next poem is published on 22nd of July, 1918, so towards the end of the war, after the war's been going for years and years. And it's called The Mothers of Our Boys. Our boys have done their duty on every land and sea, wherever duty called them to fight for liberty. We've got to thank our soldiers for peace our land enjoys, and for their sake we honor the mothers of our boys. Who knows a mother's longing, who knows a mother's love, who in the hours of darkness prays to her friend above. And who can tell her anguish when death her hope destroys? We mourn for those who suffer, the mothers of our boys. From house in town or country, from lonely bush or farm, from humble hut or mansion, come loving hearts and warm. We raise our hats in honor and wish them lifelong joys, and pray kind heaven bless them, the mothers of our boys. A lot of his work is about local politics, so particularly not so much national politics, but state and council in particular. So he's written poems about every single mayor, about all the elections and the fights. And this next poem is about one of a really extraordinary councillors, the Deputy Mayor Otto Nothling. So Dr. Nothling was here for quite some time, and he served in the council. He was the Deputy Mayor to Billy Domain and another mayor as well. But when Dr. Otto Nothling came to Maryborough, Lowther was really, really excited because Otto Nothling was an extraordinary athlete. He grew up on the Sunshine Coast, and then he went to university in Sydney. One day when he was attending the Sydney Athletics, I think he was competing in the running events, and his team didn't have any javelin throwers. So they said, Otto, can you throw the javelin in this next competition? And he had never done it before. He'd never even seen it. So he said, okay, I want to watch a few people throw first. So a couple of people threw their javelins before Otto, and then he threw his and broke the national and empire record. So he's an extraordinarily gifted athlete, and he's one of only two men to represent Australia in rugby union and cricket, which is quite extraordinary. He actually delegated Don Bradman to the 12th man in a test against England, the only time Don Bradman was the 12th man. But he came to Maryborough, and when he came to Maryborough, he was actually the captain of the Queensland Sheffield team cricket team. But he gave all that away. He gave away his sporting career. I mean, it wasn't like today. He wasn't giving away a $10 million salary, but he gave away the international competition. And he gave away his spot on the Queensland team as well. So he left being the Queensland cricket captain to come to Maryborough to work as a doctor. And he was immediately recognized. He didn't retire from cricket because he played for us, for the Maryborough. And so this poem is called Dr. Otto Nothling, All 10 Wickets for 16. And so this is a cricket game against Gayndah when Otto Nothling in bowling took all the 10 wickets for 16 runs. The Gayndah men are sportsmen good. They rose ere break of day. To meet our best 11 men, they blithely took their way. They little reckoned the fielding long that to their lot would fall, nor reckoned they of the doctor's skill or how he spun the ball. On Eskdale Park we gathered round, the captains quickly tossed, and soon the word was passed around, the Gayndah's skippers lost. The local lads played lucky bats for fieldsmen short and tall. Although they tried their very best, they could not hold the ball. The doctor got his leg in front, his luck was fairly out. Someday he'll open up the field, of that there's not a doubt. Fred Pittman played a lucky stick, O'Donnell stout and tall, soon brought the runs in tradesman's style and bravely banged the ball. At last the local men were out, and Gayndah took a hand, and Matheson and Gilbert Brave essayed to make a stand. And well they played the bowling too, nor did a wicket fall, till Stewart took a bonzer catch and grasped the flying ball. Though Alf O'Donnell bowled his best with Thurgar straight and true, the batsman showed a full-faced bat, nor could the ball get through. The doctor took his usual run, his figure stout and tall. He made them swing, he made them break, he made them edge the ball. As batsmen followed batsmen in, their efforts were in vain. The doctor with his good right arm soon sent them back again. For Otto, with his pace and length, the batsmen did appall. They could not score, they could not stick against the phantom ball. The Gayndah men were stout of heart, but vain their efforts now, and deep in thought the batsman seemed with wrinkles on his brow. The total runs were 46, and of this total small, 10 wickets fell for 16 runs to Nothling, stout and tall. Long may the gallant doctor bowl, and long enjoy the game. May every year add to his skill and bring him added fame. His good right arm and his alone caused every wicket's fall. Long will be told up Gayndah way his record with the ball. So he's mentioning names, local cricketers there that otherwise we actually probably wouldn't have much record of anymore. And a very extraordinary game from our future deputy mayor.
Married Mildred Osborough.
That's right. Oh, really? From the story, yeah. And I met his son, Martin Nothling. And Lily Nothling works for ABC now. Yeah. The poems give very good insight into Maryborough back then, working in a factory, having a beach house at Tinnan Bar or Harvey Bay, holidaying, somewhere within Queensland. This next poem is called Pialba by the Sea. And this is much later. This is the 20th of March, 1947. Or pandanus?
Breadfruit.
Perhaps, yeah.
Like it?
Yeah.
Probably not there.
No, imagine not. So this is called Pialba by the Sea. If your liver's out of order or you feel a bit run down, it means you need a break, sir, from the worry of the town. Then hie off to the seaside, where the breeze is sweet and free. 'Tis the Mecca of the weary, fair Pialba by the sea. To those who are fond of fishing, then the best of sport is here. From Gadigar's to Vernon, from Vernon to the pier. From Vernon to Urangan, and Scarness to Torquay, the roads are winding onward, round Pialba by the sea. For the sportsman there is tennis, and the ancient game of bowls, on greens so near perfection, where you'll meet with kindred souls. You can't go wrong for cricket, just wherever you may be, and there's football in the season at Pialba by the sea. The sight that's most enchanting, if you wake at peep of day, is to see the sun arising from the sea across the bay. There are farms around Pialba, there is ploughed land, there is lea, and a kindly, friendly people at Pialba by the sea. If wanting relaxation, or perhaps a quiet rest, you'll find it at the seaside, you will vote Pialba best. And when your spell is ended, we are sure you will agree, there's no place in Australia like Pialba by the sea. So I've been reading these poems and writing them out for about 5 years, and I still think it's really extraordinary that this man, is working down here at Walker's during the day, living up at Anzac Park, and I've seen his writing it out, and that he did this. So, every week, sometimes there'll be several published on the same day, that he was writing stuff like this. He wasn't paid by the tourism board for the Fraser Coast. He was doing this out of a love for his community. He wasn't even doing it for fame in any way, because he published under a pen name. So he was just doing it to lift the spirits of those around him and to tell stories. So this is another patriotic one, and this is just after the war, 2nd of April 1919. What's up there now is actually an article from the Chronicle immediately after the war. So that's about in the week after the 11th of November 1918. They organized, as they did after most wars. After World War II, it was much more spontaneous because of the wireless nature of news. The factories shut down and the vans converged in town. But in 1918, after the peace, they organized a lot of concerts, marching bands headed out all over town. And one of them, as you see there, the bands went to his house and played a lot of songs outside of his house as part of their march around town. So this next poem is from the 2nd of April 1919, so a bit after the war, but men obviously still coming home. They didn't just come home in November 1918. It took a long time for the men to get home, the ones that were still there. And it's called When the Boys Return. We stayed at home and we waved the flags and we helped to swell the crowd. We cheered the boys as they marched along with glances brave and proud. They went away and they did their bit and they faced the storms of hell. They stayed the rush of the German hosts, though many a hero fell. Now some are back in their native land, some crippled, lame and blind, and some have lost an arm or a leg, but they never seem to mind. For they're proud to know they've done their bit, and they're proud to know they've won. They're glad to be back in their native land beneath the Queensland sun. They faced the foe in many a fight, as their fathers did of old, and they ventured all for you and I, and they fought like heroes bold. There's naught too good for the men returned of their native land the pride, and don't forget for both you and I, their mates by the thousand died. Perhaps you're a man with a wife and home, perhaps you're well-to-do, with business, mansion, and garden fair, and motor car 1 or 2. Or a simple man with cottage home and a garden neat and trim, but little you'd own had it not been for the soldier they call Bill Jim. You owe it to those who blocked the way when the Germans sought the coast. You owe it to those who risked their all in stopping the German host. Think of the days when the sky was black with never a gleam of light, when it looked as though the grand old flag was going to lose the fight. 'Twas boys to the front and do your bit, we'll send you off with a cheer, and away you go and beat the foe, your billets will wait you here. Does that hold good when the boys come back? Is the promise as good today as when 'twas made in the time of stress when we urged the lads away? Give them a chance whenever you can, for they well deserve it all. They filled the breach when the odds were great and hastened the Kaiser's fall. Yes, honor the boys for what they've done and the memory of the slain, and honor each promise that's been made when the boys return again. So he was publishing these poems for many decades, and what you see towards the end, every year on his birthday, people would copy his style and pay tribute to him. There's a whole series of poems of people paying tribute to Bannerman by copying his style, his rhyming style, and talking about him. And some of these are very touching. So this one is from the 24th of May, 1944. A kindly, thoughtful gentleman with the friendly, smiling eyes, looking for the best in each of us and ready to sympathize. Smiling to the right and left of him, nodding to one here and there, waving to someone over the way, lifting his hat to the fair. Writing his old-time memories of those who have journeyed on, extolling those honest virtues and those deeds in which they shone. At times when his fancy is roaming, he writes of the long, long ago, when the oldsters now were youngsters, the fire of life and the glow. Then, to him who has remembered oh so many, could we wish for him any less than good health, long life with our blessing, and a measure of true happiness. And so that's written by an admirer, is what their pen name is, and it's called Tribute to Bannerman. And so he retired from Walker's in 1946, and then he stopped writing in 1951. He passed away a few years later in 1954. But when he did retire, the editor of the paper published this in the 7th of February 1951, pretty much the same week that they published his very final poem. In sad farewell you've laid aside the pen that freely flowed. Full many a line it wrote and well, full many a heart it glowed. A man of kindly thought yourself, kind words you said of all, you praised their virtues, lifted up the erring ones who fall. For many years a gentle pen, true mirror of your soul, has cheered, has comforted, and played a gallant, noble role. We've loved your simple creed of life, be loyal and be true, to home, to king, to country, and to those who trust in you. Kind philosophic Bannerman, dear friend of cheerful heart, God's blessing in the years ahead, old pal, you've played your part. So with that, in 1951, he ceases writing and closes the chapter on that. And I think, but what's really extraordinary is with all these poems, they never really changed much. And his character didn't change either. He was always as he was out on the cricket pitch. And he had a very similar style to Bannerman himself. Sometimes he could bat for 2 hours for 20 runs. So he was always about consistency, about honor, and about keeping his end up. And it's been my real fortune to write these books over the few years and get a sense of that. Because if I was going to nominate anyone as the man of the century for Maryborough, it would be Lowther, for what he contributed, who he cared about, and the contribution he made. So thank you for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed some of the poems.